of the interesting issues that I've come up with in the last couple of months in two different files with clients was property that was located outside the United States. For example, in my situation, one property was located in Europe and one property was located in South America. And you may say to yourself, well, what's the issue with that? What's the problem? Well, let's say someone owns property that's outside the United States in either Europe or South America, and my client is entitled to one half of the value of that property. The problem is New York courts could decide that my client is entitled to that and issue a decision saying you get half of that property. The problem then becomes, how do I make sure that my client gets that one half of the property, given that the property is located outside the United States? It's entirely likely that the country in which that property is located will not follow the New York court law. So how do I protect my client? Well, one of the strategies that we employ at Key Shapiro and Ford is I try to avoid the problem altogether. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I can find a bank account in the United States or an IRA or some other asset in the United States that could offset the value in that foreign property, that's what I'll try and do. So for example, let's say you owned property with your spouse in a foreign country, and you also owned a bank account in the United States. Let's assume that your interest in that property outside of the United States was $50,000, and the bank account that you had within the United States had $100,000 in it. If your spouse was entitled to half of your bank account in the United States, or $50,000, what we would do here at Key Shapiro and Ford is we would say, well, you keep the property located outside of the United States, and we'll keep the bank account located here in the United States. What that does is it gives us control over making sure that my client gets all of the funds that they're entitled to. And I no longer am concerned with what would happen to that property located outside the United States, because it's not my problem. My client is already whole. Now, in the event that there is not property within the United States sufficient to cover your interest in the property that's outside of the United States, then that becomes a problem. And ideally, the best solution would be to sell that property located outside the United States while the case was still going, and to make sure that we could divide the proceeds accordingly. But you can't always do that, so there are some problems that exist with properties that are located outside the United States.